The snowstorm had swallowed the valley whole the night she came, a night so silent that even the wolves hid beneath the pines, and the winds howled through the canyons like ghosts searching for warmth. Inside the lonely cabin perched at the ridge, Ethan Hale, once a proud rancher, now a man scraping through life with nothing but memories and regrets, sat by the fading fire with only the crackling logs to remind him he wasn't entirely alone. His world had quieted ever since he lost his wife to fever and his son to the mountains. 2 winters passed, and though years had passed, the cabin still felt haunted by laughter that no longer echoed. He had accepted a life of silence, until that night when the timid knock at the door nearly froze his blood. No one ever came up here. No one dared to this late. He rose slowly, lantern in hand, and pulled open the door, and there she was, a little girl no older than 6, trembling from cold, cheeks red as cherries, her tiny boots covered in ice, her fists clinging to a worn-out rag doll as though it was the only piece of her world she had left. Ethan knelt to her level, lowering the lantern so the soft glow touched her face, and she flinched, not from fear, but from the instinct of someone who'd been hurt before. "Sweetheart, where are your folks?" he whispered, but the girl only stepped closer to the warm light. Eyes glassy with tears, she fought to hold back. He noticed then that her dress was thin and torn, her hands bruised from frostbite beginning to take shape, and she stood with the stiff, fragile posture of a child who had been wandering far too long. For a man who had closed his heart, something in him cracked open as he gently extended his hand. "You're safe now," he said softly. But the words nearly caught in his throat, because he hadn't said that to anyone in years. Slowly, she reached out, her tiny fingers shaking as they brushed his gloved palm. "My name is Lily," she whispered, almost too soft to hear. "Mama didn't wake up, and I didn't know where to go." Her voice dissolved, and with it, Ethan felt the weight of the world collapse onto his shoulders. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms, feeling how feather-light and cold she was, and carried her inside. Shutting the door against the unforgiving storm, he wrapped her in a wool blanket, warmed her hands by the fire, gave her hot broth, and watched life creep back into her cheeks. As she ate, she spoke in broken pieces, how her mother had been homeless since the town turned them away, how they kept walking from ranch to ranch seeking help, how her mother collapsed in the snow by the river and wouldn't wake up no matter how much Lily cried. Ethan listened, guilt crushing him for every time he'd ignored strangers in need, for every time he'd chosen isolation over compassion. When Lily finally slept on the fur rug by the fire, Ethan sat beside her with his old rifle across his lap, not for danger, but for the sense of purpose he thought he'd lost. He vowed that night that Lily would never feel alone again. When he noticed tears stained her little doll, he gently wiped them with his sleeve, whispering a promise to the empty room. "Whatever brought you here, little one, I won't let the world take anything else from you." Outside, the snowstorm raged, but inside the small cabin, something long frozen began to thaw. Morning broke slowly over the mountains, brushing pale gold across the snow, and Ethan woke to the soft sound of small footsteps padding across the wooden floor. Lily stood at the window, hugging her rag doll, staring out at the blinding white world as though expecting her mother to walk out of it. Ethan stepped beside her, his heart twisting as she whispered, "Maybe Mama's just sleeping longer today." And though he wished he could tell her otherwise, he couldn't bring himself to shatter the fragile hope in her voice. Instead, he knelt and gently rested a hand on her shoulder. "Lily, sometimes God takes people somewhere warm, where the cold can't hurt them anymore," he said, voice trembling despite his effort to stay steady. She looked up at him then, eyes full of questions too big for a child. "Will she be warm there?" she whispered. Ethan's voice broke. "Warmer than ever." And with that, her small body leaned into him, seeking comfort he hadn't realized he could give. Over the next days, Ethan cared for Lily, as though she had always been his own, teaching her how to feed the horses, showing her how to hammer nails into wood, wrapping her hands in mittens that once belonged to his late son. With each passing hour, she brought life back to the cabin, filling it with giggles, clumsy footsteps, and soft humming as she mended her doll. But just as hope began to take root, trouble arrived from the valley. 3 men from town, rough ranch hands who recognized Lily and knew her mother had been found. They came demanding the child be taken to the town orphanage, a place known for harsh discipline and colder hearts. Lily clung to Ethan's leg, eyes wide with fear as they tried to pull her away, and Ethan felt fire rise in his chest, a protective fury he had not felt since the day his own family was alive. "She stays with me," he growled, stepping between her and the men. "If you try to take her, you'll have to get through me first." The men weren't expecting resistance, especially not from the quiet hermit rancher. They threatened him, mocked him, shoved him, but Ethan didn't move. Instead, he lifted his rifle and cocked it, his voice deadly calm. "This child buried her mother in the snow. You think I'll hand her to a place where nobody cares, whether she cries or starves? Not while I'm breathing." Something in his eyes must have convinced them. The men backed down, cursing as they walked off into the cold. Lily ran to Ethan, sobbing into his coat, and he held her tightly, whispering, "You're safe. I won't let anyone hurt you." That night, as snow fell outside and the fire glowed brighter than ever, Ethan made the decision to adopt her legally, no matter the cost, no matter the fight. He cleaned the cabin, shaved his beard, prepared documents, even rode into town with Lily, bundled close against his chest. The townsfolk, surprised to see the man who once never spoke to anyone, now walking through the streets with a child clinging to him, whispered in shock, but some smiled. At the courthouse, Ethan stood tall and declared, "This child is my family." Weeks later, the judge granted him guardianship. Moved by the bond between them, Lily jumped into Ethan's arms, laughing for the first time since he'd met her, and the sound healed something deep in him. Together, they rode home under a sky filled with gentle snowflakes, a new beginning falling around them. The snowstorm showed no mercy, turning the valley into a blinding world of white, where even the tallest pines bent under the weight of ice and wind. Inside the small cabin perched on the ridge, Ethan Hale sat hunched by the fire, his back aching, his hands raw from the relentless cold. The little girl huddled beside him, her tiny body shivering under a threadbare blanket. Her wide eyes reflected the flickering firelight, a mixture of fear, hope, and an innocence that seemed almost foreign in a world so cruel. Ethan swallowed hard, forcing down memories that threatened to drown him, memories of loss, of helplessness, of nights spent wishing he could have done more. The girl's voice, soft and trembling, finally broke the silence. He said we'd have nowhere to go if you didn't help." Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't ask who he was. What mattered was the child before him, trusting him, relying on him to shield her from the storm, from the cold, from the world outside. Kneeling, he met her gaze, forcing his voice to stay steady. "You're safe here. For tonight, and as long as I can keep the fire burning, you're safe." The wind outside screamed, rattling the cabin as if trying to break in, but Ethan ignored it. The storm was a reminder of the merciless world beyond, yet inside, this fragile space was a sanctuary, a thin line against the chaos of life. He rummaged through the cabin's sparse provisions, finding scraps of bread and a small pot of stew. It was barely enough, but it was something. The girl ate slowly, cautiously, as if expecting the meal to vanish before her eyes. Ethan watched, feeling both sorrow and determination. He remembered his own daughter, lost to illness years ago, and the unbearable ache of failure. He had lost once. He would not lose again. Hours passed. The fire burned low, yet its warmth created a fragile cocoon of safety. The girl's eyes began to droop with exhaustion, but she clung to Ethan's side, unwilling to fully surrender to sleep. Outside, distant cries reached him. Other children, other lives caught in the storm, alone and desperate. He clenched his fists, a storm of resolve matching the one raging outside. He could not save them all, yet he would not stand idle while innocence suffered. If he could offer even one child a chance at safety, he would. As night deepened, the girl finally allowed herself to rest, leaning against him, her breathing evening out. Ethan sat quietly, watching the shadows dance on the walls, a silent vow forming in his heart. Tomorrow they would need more than warmth. They would need courage, allies, and perhaps luck. But tonight he had carved out a sliver of safety, a fragile victory against the harshness of life. He whispered to the sleeping child, his voice steady yet full of emotion. "No one will take you from me. Not now. Not ever." The words felt heavy but necessary. In the silence that followed, broken only by the crackling fire and the wind's mournful howl, Ethan felt something he had not felt in years, a flicker of hope. The storm outside might rage, the world might be cruel, but inside this small cabin, he had created a sanctuary, and in doing so, he had reclaimed a piece of himself he thought was lost forever. And as the night pressed on, he knew that tomorrow's journey would be perilous. But tonight they survived. And survival in a world this merciless was everything.